Thanks for joining me again today. We're continuing our discussion on the Fourth Amendment. Quick recap of what we've been doing so far is we've really just been going into specific instances where the Supreme Court has either said, yes, this is a search, this is constitutionally protected, or no, this is not a search, this is not constitutionally protected. The most important thing to remember so far is the two tests to determine whether something is a search or whether something is not a search. And those two tests, again, are whether the person has a reasonable expectation of privacy in the area that's being searched, and if that expectation of privacy is one that society would see as reasonable. And then the other test that we have is the trespassory test, where there has to be some kind of intrusion, trespass into the constitutionally protected area by a government agent. Today is going to be our last kind of random topic of is this a search, is this not a search, and we're going to be talking about dog sniff cases. These are cases where the police are using their canine units in order to sniff for drugs and determine whether or not they should arrest somebody for drug possession or something like that. So there's a couple different situations that we need to look at, and the Supreme Court has looked at several cases on this specific topic. So first, let's say that I was driving down the highway and I have a couple pounds of coke in the back, in the trunk of my car. And I get pulled over by a police officer because I'm speeding. And so the police officer happens to be a canine unit as well. And while he comes up, gets my ID, registration, and goes back to his car to write me a ticket. And in the meantime, his partner grabs the dog, walks the dog around my car, and then when the dog gets to the trunk, the dog starts notifying the officer that there are drugs in the trunk. Now, in that situation, is that a search? Is that constitutionally protected? And the Supreme Court has looked at a case similar to this and decided that, well, that is not a constitutionally protected area. The police officer is able to do that. Now, let's change the facts just a little bit. So let's say I'm pulled over, and then the officer takes my information, and then gives me a ticket back, and then says, "Hold on, we need to wait for our canine unit to come over here so that they can check your car, make sure that you're okay to go." So I sit and I'm waiting, and then the canine unit arrives. The canine unit walks around my car, and then once they get to the trunk of the car, alerts that there's drugs in the car. In that situation, that is a search, that is constitutionally protected, and the reason between this time and the previous time is that the search became a prolonged detention. In the first example, the officer's main reason for pulling me over was just to give me a ticket. And within that same span of time, they were able to walk the dog around the car and get alerted to the drugs in the trunk. Whereas in the second instance, the officer's main goal was still just to give me a traffic ticket. But when the officer waited to have a canine unit come and then walk around my car and find the drugs in that instance, that prolonged the detention. I shouldn't have had to have waited that long, and so that is constitutionally protected. That's a search. And that's a very, very minute and specific fact difference between those two scenarios, but it makes a world of difference as far as the Fourth Amendment is concerned. So that's dealing with traffic stops and kind of the car searches when a dog is being used to walk around. Let's talk about what if a police officer walks up to your home. Now, a police officer is allowed to walk up to your home and knock on your door. All right, that's anybody in the public is allowed to do that. If I wanted to go borrow some butter or sugar from my neighbor, I can walk up, knock on their door, and as long as I'm not overstaying my welcome, it's not a trespass. So a police officer, if they wanted to come up and knock on your door, they're able to do that. But let's say that a police officer walks up to your door with a dog, dog that's trained in sniffing for drugs. And the purpose of the police officer walking up was to see whether or not there are drugs inside. Now, the Supreme Court has ruled on a case on this topic where they're saying, yes, the police officer can walk up there, but if the police officer is walking up there with a dog with the intent of searching and finding out whether or not there are drugs on the premises, well, that becomes an invasion into the curtilage of the home, because your front porch, your front door area, that's certainly the curtilage of your home. So in that instance, the police officers are not allowed to do that. That is a search that is constitutionally protected. And it really goes back to the second test we have for whether or not something is a search, that trespass test. The officer is trespassing into the curtilage of the home for the purpose of doing a search. If the police officer walked up there without the dog and was trying to do something else, maybe there was an accident down the road and they were just knocking on the door to see whether or not you knew what was going on, if you had any information, if you heard anything, that wouldn't be a search, that would be allowed. But the fact that they went up with the dog to sniff for drugs made it a search, and that is protected under the Fourth Amendment. That evidence would not be admissible in court. So thanks for joining me again today. I hope you learned something. All of these videos and cases are very fact specific, but this is a good basic foundation to start understanding the Fourth Amendment and Fourth Amendment law. So I hope you learned something. If you have any questions, if you think some of this might apply to a case that you're dealing with, make sure to contact an attorney. And I look forward to seeing you again in the next video. Thank you.